Dear Rector, colleagues, students, and guests, welcome to the 5th lecture of the lecture series that the Faculty of Arts and Sciences has organized to celebrate the 150th anniversary of Robert College and Boğaziçi University. Those of you who have attended the previous lectures know that at the beginning of each lecture, I have given brief notes on the history of this institution. Well, I'm not going to do this today, since the foremost expert himself is here to talk about it. But instead, let me allow me to say a few words about the man himself. Early in September 1960, a charter flight of SAS brought out to Istanbul the new teachers at the American colleges, as well as those returning from summer holidays or sabbaticals in the US. Among the new faculty was Dr. John Freely. He is, yes, Professor of Physics, arriving with his wife Dolores next to him. Dolores, daughters Maureen and Eileen, other way around, Eileen and Maureen, and his son Brandon. And that is how it all began. Ever since then, with an interruption of some years in the 1980s, Professor Freely has been an integral part of this institution, of the physics department, and of the lives of all who have been here over this period. John Freely was born in New York to Irish immigrant parents. During the Second World War, when he was 17, he joined the US Navy and served for 2 years, including combat duty with a commando unit in the Pacific, India, Burma, and China. After the war, he completed his undergraduate degree at Inoa College in 1951 and got his master's and PhD degrees from New York University in 1953 and 1960, respectively. During this period, he worked as a researcher at Princeton University. At Robert College, right from the beginning, in addition to his physics duties, John Freely was always involved in literary and cultural life on campus, from editing the first literary magazine put out by the faculty, The Golden Horn, to directing and writing plays like the famous musical Dracula, which he wrote and directed with Donald Hoffman. A turning point in his career as author was when he collaborated with Hilary Sumner Boyd in writing a guidebook to the monuments of Istanbul, published by the Red House Press under the title Strolling Through Istanbul in 1972. It is still in print and universally accepted as the best introduction to the city. Since then, Professor Freely has written more than 60 books, it's very difficult to catch up with him, on the history of this region, the history of science, and travel and guidebooks, mostly to Turkey and areas in the Eastern Mediterranean. He has also worked extensively in the Robert College archives, which is in Columbia University now, and has written the most comprehensive histories of the college. With his never-ending energy, his infectious enthusiasm, and his good humor, John Freely has enlightened and stimulated many generations of college students in fields as diverse as physics, history, literature, and history of science. In recognition of a lifetime service to this institution, I would like to invite our rector to present him with a statement of our appreciation and gratitude for all that he has done to make Robert College and Boğaziçi University the special places they are.
John, this is for you.
Okay. Just for a minute. We have left strict instructions at the door that no one under 70 is to be allowed in. Okay. This will be the first time in my life I've given a lecture sitting down. Maybe I shouldn't sit down. Okay. Let me is it working? Let me introduce not my assistant, my colleague. This is Çetin Yılmaz, otherwise known as Leonardo da Vinci. For those of you under 70 who don't know who I am, I first arrived here in 1960 with my wife and 3 children, and we were here for 16 years, and then we disappeared completely. And then we came back, or were brought back, in 1993 by Gülen Aktaş and others. I don't know why they brought me back, but they brought me back anyway. But here I am, and I was teaching up until 3 years ago, and now I'm something of a professor emeritus. But Gülen has usually, for these talks, given an introduction in terms of Cyrus Hammond. And so I thought, well, I will key into that. But also, I've been interviewed several times in the last several days by newspapers, and the journalists are usually range in age from 12 to 15 years old. And the questions they ask me, the same questions: what brought you here in the first place, and how have things changed? Well, for them, how would they possibly know? For example, continuity and change. Well, if you go back to the first philosopher of nature, Thales of Miletus, it's substance and quality. The substance remains the same, the qualities change. Water is water, whether it's solid, liquid, or gas. I was originally solid, and then I became liquid, now I'm all gas. But Gülen, in her wonderful introduction, which I've heard now several times. By the way, I just want to compliment Gülen on this extraordinary series, which has brought in people from in literature and art, science, and so forth. So this is a sort of homemade product you're getting right now, so it's going to be different. But she did talk about Cyrus Hammond. See, if you ask an Irishman to tell you a story, well, I should say that Oscar Wilde, the great Anglo-Irish writer, said that, oh, if you could only teach the English to talk and the Irish to shut up. But when the Irish start to tell a story, they have to go back. It went to what they call the night of time. You've got to go right back to the very beginning. So that's what I'm going to do. But in the most extraordinary way, when I do that, I come back to Cyrus Hammond. in her wonderful introduction, she talked about Cyrus Hammond working at the Florence Nightingale's hospital. Actually, Florence Nightingale had two hospitals. One of them was in over in what they call Harem, over in Üsküdar, and the other one was the Kuleli. I'm not going to give the point away, but what he did was bake bread for the veterans in the hospital, but he also did their laundry. And he did the laundry by taking beer vats. He invented the laundromat. Yeah. Well, among the people whose life he saved by doing that was my great-grandfather. Now, in order to be alive now, you need all your great-grandfathers intact. If you lose one great-grandfather, that's it. And this particular great-grandfather is very valuable because he's not only my great-grandfather, but he's Gregory Peck's great-grandfather. And so, but anyway, Chetine, now we have the first. No, the first slide for this slide. Now, since I can't see it, but you can. This slide. This came in a postcard from Edinburgh to my friend Amin Saatchi 2 months ago. I'd never seen it before. And the label on it says Constantinople 1862, which is 1 year before everything started. And I can recognize every single building on here. The buildings, now I need to turn, and now the fun starts. Okay. Oh, I have this. You have Okay. Now, as the Chinese say, pushy button, run like hell. So here. So now, how do I speak? Here we go. This is when they ask me about whether Istanbul has changed. Well, here is Istanbul 1862. There's not a building on here that I cannot recognize. These are the buildings of the. At that time, this photograph was taken from the Beyazıt Fire Tower, and these are the buildings of the Ottoman Ministry of War right here. Now Istanbul University. This is the Zincirli Han. This is the Büyük Valide Han, which was built in 1661 by the Sultan Valide Kösem, the mother of two crazy sultans, Murat V and Ibrahim. And this is the 8th century Byzantine tower. But this little building here is the headquarters of the American Board of Missionaries. And this is where Cyrus Hammond, when he first came, Cyrus Hammond first came to Izmir in 1839. Then he came by ship with his wife to Istanbul, and they landed right here. And this is where they would have stayed first, in this building here. This building still belonged to the American Board up until a few years ago. And the American Board, the Publications Board, which published our story through Istanbul in 1972, was first set up there in 1876. So, but Cyrus Hammond's ship would have landed right here in 1839. Now, in 1855, 56, 6 years after this, before this picture was taken, the British fleet arrived here. With the army for the Crimean War. And on one of the troop ships was a young 18-year-old Irish soldier named Thomas Ashe, who was my great-grandfather. And he was immediately shipped off to the Crimean War, and in the Battle of the Redan, which was one of the last battles of the war, there was a quite extraordinary battle called the Attack on the Redan. See, when the French army sends in a suicide mission, they send in the Senegalese, the French black troops. When the British army has a suicide mission, they send in the Irish. And so in this case, they sent in an Irish regiment and a Turkish regiment side by side, and they were all blown away. The Turkish veterans were mostly left to die on the battlefield, but the British-Irish were taken to Florence Nightingale's hospital, and my great-grandfather just barely survived. But he mentioned for the rest of his life, he talked about Johnny Turk and the friendships he's made in the Turkish army. And while he was here, and when he went into the army, that particular regiment, the 88th Regiment of Foot, is very famous. It was founded during the Peninsular Wars against Napoleon. And it fought through all the wars of the 19th century. It continued to fight and distinguish itself until the Irish Rebellion started in 1916. Then it was dissolved. He died a year or two before I was born, but they're still talking about him in the village in Ireland where he is from and where I came from, sort of. But anyway, so in other words, Istanbul hasn't really changed. The people who think it's changed don't really know it. When you're asking people about change and continuity, they have to know what they're talking about. In fact, when I say I haven't changed. I'm the same person I was when I first came, but I'm not sure sometimes. I'm better behaved now and maybe less fun, but now finally slide to the second slide. Now, here we go back almost to the beginnings. See, my great-grandfather, when he was in Constantinople, which they called it then, he couldn't read or write, nor he couldn't speak English either. But he bought a book, and the book was called A Pictorial Journey Around the World. He bought it because it had pictures, it had gravures, and it had gravures of Constantinople. There was a chapter on a voyage up to Limpopo, a chapter on a journey by rail across the American West, and he brought that home, and he was made postmaster of the local village. The village has about 8 houses in it, and he had a postmaster who couldn't read and write, but he sent his daughter to school, and the daughter is my grandmother. She went to school and became a school teacher, and this is her husband. This is my grandfather, Tomas. He never learned to read and write. He learned English after he got married. An extremely intelligent and very curious man, and people always asked him, where did he learn what he learned about the world? And he said, from the wind. The wind brought it in. And this is me and my sister. You see, my mother and father were both born in Ireland in separate places, and they met, married, and conceived me, I think in that order, although the order might be slightly different, in Boston. And my father was working then as a ditch digger, a laborer. My mother was a maid. And as soon as my mother got pregnant, they fired her, and so she said, I did not leave Ireland to live among the Irish, and so she moved down to New York, and my father got a job as a tramvaji. And then he lost that job in 1930 when I was 4 years old, and so my mother had to take me back to Ireland, here. And this is shortly after we arrived. I was born in 1926. This picture was probably taken in about 1930-31. We're still wearing our fancy American clothes. But this is where I spent age 4 to almost 7. Now, if you take the map of Europe, the longest straight line you can draw on a flat map would be from this room to here, 3,000 kilometers. In other words, the longest straight line you can draw in Europe. We are here now, we're 30 degrees east of Greenwich. This is 10 degrees 30 minutes west of Greenwich. It's the longest straight line you can draw in Europe and still be in Europe. From here, this is the southwesternmost tip of Ireland. It's a Chickmas. From the end of this peninsula, it is 5,000 kilometers, and the next stop is Boston. So that the people who live there, the people who live on this peninsula now, have been there since about 7,500 BC. There's been very little. The most recent input into this peninsula, the Normans, when they came in the 11th century. See, the Celts never came here at all. When I was growing up, I left New York when I was 4. Actually, not New York, but Brooklyn. Those who know New York know that Brooklyn is a foreign country. Brooklyn is not at all like the rest of New York. Up until in 1898, the biggest city in the United States was New York. The second biggest city was Brooklyn. And then they persuaded Brooklyn to become part of New York, but it never really is. And when I was growing up, there was none of my friends, classmates had a mother or father who was born in the United States. They were all born somewhere else. Many of them were still speaking Italian, Chinese, and so forth. And so, but I was speaking English, and then at 4 years old, suddenly I'm transported to Ireland, and nobody's speaking English at all. They're all speaking Irish. But my grandfather, out of deference to me, spoke English in front of me. But all the people that I met, all the older people, all speaking Irish. If you go there today, they're all still speaking Irish. And because being as remote as that, the perfidious Albion, which is what we refer to when we're talking about England, the English never quite got there, so the Irish, at the tip of this It's remote enough, this peninsula, but at the very tip of the peninsula, there are 3 small little islands called the Blasket Islands, where in 1932, on my 6th birthday, 26th of June 1932, my grandfather took me in as a Sheikh Araba to meet the people coming in from the Blasket Island. It's a tiny little, 3 little islands, not as big as Bucada and those islands, smaller than that. Population has been out there since the 8th millennium BC. And the people come ashore once a week to sell their fish and find a wife. And in 1932, the 6th birthday, I'm standing there, and these people are coming ashore, my grandfather's talking to them. We did not realize that out on the island at that time was E.M. Forster, the great novelist. He was out there collecting the stories of the islanders. And the 3 writers, Maurice O'Sullivan, who's my grandfather's first cousin, Peg Sayers, Tomasa Crone. Their books, these are writers who could not read or write and who could not speak English. Their books were taken down, first of all, Tomasa Crone, Maurice O'Sullivan's book, 20 Years Ago, and was taken down and published simultaneously in English and Irish, and published in 1932. It became an international bestseller. It's in all the languages of the world and so forth. And these people left those islands in 1953, and all living in Springfield, Massachusetts now. But Irish scholars have compared those people to Homer's time, because Homer, as we know, some of us know, was illiterate. And literacy came to Greece in his own lifetime. Literacy came to Greece in 750 BC. From the Phoenician alphabet was brought to Greece in his own lifetime. He may possibly have dictated the Odyssey and the Iliad to someone, but he himself could not read or write. And so the 2 situations are entirely equivalent. So this is E.M. Forster in his introduction to 20 Years Ago, saying that Maurice O'Sullivan, who I'm related to, is describing Neolithic life from the inside. So that's the culture that I come from. And that explains it. It's a completely oral culture. Things don't get written down. They go straight to the hard drive here. And as long as the hard drive doesn't get soft, then you're okay. You remember everything. And it's still like that there. But I'm coming into it as an outsider. I'm treated as an outsider. But then 3 years later, my father finally gets a job. He gets a job as a gravedigger, steady work in New York. And I come back, and I'm treated as a foreigner when I come back to New York. But the great advantage I had, my grandmother taught me how to read from pictorial voyage around the world. And a city that fixated itself on my attention was Constantinople. So I thought, I'm going to get there. By hook or crook, I'll get to Constantinople one way or another. So we get back to New York, and my father's got a steady job. But in those years, gravediggers, there was an important piece of legislation passed in 1943, the Portal Page Act. Before that, for example, coal miners only got paid once they began to dig. They didn't get paid for the time going down and going back. And gravediggers only got paid when the shovel went into the ground with the first shovel full of earth in and out again. They didn't get paid. Well, nobody died, they didn't get paid. So people don't die regularly, and so when people don't die, the gravedigger doesn't get paid, and so the gravedigger has to go trap a rabbit and bring it home for his family. So in other words, but there was no distinction about being poor in Brooklyn. Everybody was poor, and so and the poor had to be very, very ingenious about how to survive. And so I had a classmate who was even poorer than I was, so he broke me in. We became eskiges, and we made ourselves a little cart. We went around picking up old newspapers. For 100 pounds of old newspaper, you got 2 cents. For a pound of iron, you got 5 cents. So we would, in an afternoon, manage to make about $1 between us. And in those years, everything was very cheap, so we managed to see about 10 movies a week. But we had within walking distance of us the public library. No matter where you live in New York City, you have a public library. So we're reading. And all of the left-wing newspapers had programs in educating yourself. You could clip out a little piece of paper, and for $10 a year, you get a book a week. And so I was reading voraciously. I was reading 1-2 books a week, but not starting with baby books, reading Joseph Conrad when I was 8 years old. And so, in other words, with affluent societies, young boys don't get to leave home until they're about 35 years old. And so, but in poorer societies, I can see it here in Istanbul all the time. The poor have a great advantage. They're freed on their own. And also in the books I've written about medieval universities, one ordinarily started university at Oxford, Cambridge, at 14. Give you an example from American life. John Adams, the second president of the United States, graduated from Harvard at 14. In Harvard Yard, when he graduated, the graduates came out, all men of course, and waiting in Harvard Yard itself would be men with 2 horses. 1 horse for them and 1 horse for the person they employed to be a school teacher. So John Adams comes out and someone says, "Would you like to be a teacher?" And he says, "Yes." He said, "Okay, get on the horse." And off they go. This is what life was like then. And by the way, Harvard University was still Harvard College in those years, and Princeton University was the College of New Jersey in those years. But Cyrus Hammond, now, are we ready for Cyrus Hammond? So Cyrus Hammond, lots been said about him. First of all, these are really independent, extraordinarily independent people. His grandfather was one of Washington's colonels. And when the War of Independence ended, Washington gave his colonels land. He gave some of them land in Maine. Maine is the Texas of New England. It is huge. It is benighted. It's a very conservative state. It has lots of rich people living along the shore, but in the interior of Maine, it's as benighted. It's more benighted than Texas. And he was extremely poor. His father died when he was quite young, so he literally had to work on the farm. And he got a scholarship to go to Bowdoin College. If you wonder, this beautiful campus here is entirely patterned on the architecture of Bowdoin College in Maine, because I've been up there. But he was a scholarship student. He was a classmate of Franklin Pierce, who became the President of the United States. Hawthorne was a friend of his. Joseph Prescott, the great historian of Mexico and Peru, was a classmate of his. And for his senior project, he built the first steam engine in the state of Maine. He was very handy with his hands. But these people were, this is the Protestant work ethic. But he didn't, of course, know what he was going to do, because for poor boys, there's a ceiling, there are no possibilities at all. So he thought, someone suggested he be a preacher, and so he hooked onto that. And his first mission actually was among the indigent Irish in Belfast, Maine. And then his second choice after that was China. He wanted to go to China as mission. In fact, most of the young missionaries would have preferred to go to China. They didn't really know about Turkey, and it was only, and Africa was another choice. I never touched this stuff. Thank you. But in other words, I saw in him sort of, see, there's a huge divide among Americans. This brilliant lecture that was given here last week by Ted Widmer. Ted Widmer was one of the nicest people I ever met. He is the great-great-grandson of Cyrus Hammond. And when I first met Ted, he was, Hillary Clinton was giving a talk here, and Bill Clinton was giving a talk in the Turkish parliament. Ted had written both their speeches. He is their speechwriter. And so Ted was standing there. I went up and talked to him, introduced myself. He'd never been here before. Now, on this campus here, all this building is Hamlin Hall, which Cyrus Hammond himself built. But all the other buildings, except this one, were built by Cyrus Hammond's youngest son, Alfred Hammond. And so I told that to Ted and showed that he hadn't realized that before. But anyway, we were very good friends for years, and he gave a real wonderful talk, one of the greatest talks I've ever heard in my life. And then Ghislaine took us all down to dinner the following evening, and so I'm sitting across from him. And I said, when did your family first come to America? And he said, well, we came on the Mayflower in 1620. And he said, I'm a direct descendant of William Bradford. Now, William Bradford is the founder of the Plymouth Bay Colony. So he said, when did your family come? And I said, well, my family came to America in 1921 and 1922. But we're both very American. And so his family has been since the in America 300 years longer than I am, and so how do I become an American? Well, you know, Nikos Kazantzakis, the great Cretan writer, when he was a young man, he was traveling through the Peloponnesus, and everyone was speaking Albanian. He goes back as an old man, and they're all speaking Greek. And he says, Greece is a factory for making Greeks, just like America is a factory for making Americans. Culture and nationality are fairly recent things. I don't know if Selja Kasenbel is here, but she gets very annoyed every time I start speaking about World War II, because the reason I enlisted in the U.S. Navy is that the Navy had a motto saying, join the Navy and see the world. They didn't mention about the bad parts of it. But I really did get to see the world. And when the war ended, I was up in southwest China within sight of Tibet. But one of the places we were at was Chengdu. Now, Chengdu is Xanadu. It's the summer palace of Kublai Khan. Now, I don't know if anybody from the humanities is here, but does anyone know the words from in Xanadu did Kublai Khan a stately pleasure dome decree where Alf the sacred river ran and caverns of man. So that's not bad. But we got there by going across the Pacific, and I was operating an anti-aircraft gun, but in peaceful moments in between, I went down to the Catholic chaplain, and he gave me the curriculum for the Great Books program at St. John's College, Annapolis, Maryland. And when I came home after the war, I took a year off on unemployment relief because they didn't have any jobs for people blowing up things. And so I spent a year reading through the great classics from Homer up to Joyce. But I'd already read Homer before I went into the Navy. So on the way back, we came back to the Indian Ocean, Suez Canal, and Mediterranean. And I was able to follow Homer's tracks. For example, we came back within sight of Tunisia, and I was able to see the land of the lotus eaters. Can you guess where the land of the lotus eaters is? It's very simple. In fact, you've all seen it, because see, after the Trojan War, Odysseus and his men said, what the hell are we going to do now? We don't have any, can't fight anymore. So they went up and they raided a town up in what would now be Alexandroupolis. And then after that, a storm took them and blew them right across, the Meltem blew them right across. So if you take a ruler on a map and go from, say, Alexandroupolis and draw, you come right to Tunisia. The land of the lotus eaters appears as the locale in Star Wars. So if you've seen Star Wars, you've seen the land of the lotus eaters. So these are the things you learn. One of the things, in this rambling talk, one of the things I'm trying to talk about is that education is not confined to schools. And if you come from a society like I do, one of the things I'm trying to get at is the fact that Ireland and Turkey have something extraordinary in common. We're hanging off the two opposite ends of Europe. Thanks to the British, we did not get to participate in the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Counter-Reformation. We went straight from Neolithic times to the modern world. Turkey, the same thing. In other words, it's a marathon race, but you don't have to go all the way. You can go in at the very end. I was at a very interesting dinner party about 3 months ago with Tony and Ghislaine and a bunch of rich people. And there was a very attractive German lady sitting next to me here, and next to her was sitting Hugh Pope, a very good friend of mine, a journalist. And he was telling this lady, he said that his daughter has just finished her first year at Cambridge University, and that she is the 6th generation of her family to go to Cambridge. And so the lady was very impressed. And I told the lady, I said, I am the 2nd generation of my family that can write our name. But anyway, I think we better move on now. Okay. Now, this is an extraordinary, this is a picture of Hamlin Hall just a couple of days before. See, Robert College, when it was founded down in Quebec, and they didn't move up here until 1871. You'll notice this little building here. That's a little Geji that Cyrus Hammond himself built. That's where he changed his clothes. That's where he went to the toilet. That's where he washed up when he was finished. He would sometimes go straight from here. He once went straight from here to the British Embassy to meet the Prince of Wales. But he designed this building himself. He ordered all the ironworks. He put them all in place. He did everything. Nothing was left to anyone else at all. As we learned from Ted Widmer, he lost 2 of his fingers one day, so the 2 fingers are still somewhere in here. It didn't stop him at all. But it was on the 17th of May of 1871, it was declared ready for occupancy. The school was still down in Bebek. It would be in, I can tell you exactly where it is, not Kachuk Bebek, but in the other part of Bebek. And so on the night of the 17th, you had to get into the school, you had to be 11 years old. And so the famous Baker department store in Istanbul had a son who was 11 years old on the 17th of May of 1871, and they were determined to get him into Robert College, so they brought him up and put him in the building all by himself. So he was in there all night long, poor kid, shivering and didn't know what to do with himself until the rest of the student body came up and joined him that day. Now, I learned about that from his memoirs. When he was in his 70s, he wrote his memoirs talking about that frightful first day. So the first student at Robert College in this building was a baker. Now, sitting over there is my daughter Eileen, posing as an adult. And her, my Damatas, my long-suffering Damatas there too. Now, their son, Alexander Baker, was the last foreign student accepted at Robert College in Arnavutköy, because the headmaster at the time, in his wisdom, said no more foreign students here. So the foreign students at Robert College begin and end with the baker. Okay, now this is Hat Day. This is the day, the first day that hats had to be worn in the Ottoman Empire. Before that, you could wear turbans and things like that, but this is Hat Day. And these gentlemen are all wearing their hats. And they're all wearing very fancy hats. The second gentleman from the left, this gentleman here, this is Hussein Bektash. Now, he's the first Turk to graduate from Robert College. He's not the first Turk at Robert College at all. There were quite a few, not quite a few, but a number of Turkish students who were at the school. For one reason or another, they didn't make it. But he's the first graduate. And why him? Well, he is from the Bektashi Tekke on the top of the hill. And he, from his story, which he actually told me himself and told other people, he said he just walked down one day, walked into class, and they said, stay here, why not stay out? That's his story, which may or may not be true. But in my day, he was the Turkish vice president. We used to have our faculty meetings in this room, and Hussein Bay would sit there, cigarette on a long cigarette holder, dreamy expression in his eye, and paying no attention to what was being said, as I was not either. And I would go up and say a few words to him, and he didn't know who I was. But he said the following to me. He said, "What's new with the Rialto?" Now, if you know your Sheikh, what's new with the Rialto? What's new with the Rialto is from the Merchant of Venice. No. And so I knew what the response was, and so that's all he cared about. But he was, his wife was much, Miri Hanım, who was a member of Parliament, one of her first women in Parliament, was much more loquacious than him, so I got to know her better. But the other gentlemen are very interesting too. Sorry for here. These two gentlemen are brothers. This is Keramet Nigar, and this is Faradun Nigar. Now, Faradun Nigar was the husband of Nigar Hanım, the famous Magyar poetess, whose house, if you go down the Mezarlik Road, that white house there is the Nigar Hanım kiosk where we lived from 1964 to 1967. And this is Nigar Hanım's husband. They left that house at some point because an angel appeared to Faradun Bey in a dream one night and said, "Faradun Bey, this house is cursed, get out of here." So the house was vacant for years, and we moved in ourselves. But Keramet Nigar was Karametnagor was secretary of Abdulmajid Effendi, the Caliph. And when the Caliph was forced to leave Turkey in 1924, he went with them and kept a diary of the whole thing. And he had, I don't know if you've heard the story, but when the last Sultan and the last Caliph had to leave at very short notice, and when they got to the train station in Edirne, according to Karamet Bey's diary, the trainmaster, they had Abdulmajid Effendi, they had no money with them. So the trainmaster, who happened to be Jewish, said, Padishah, well, he wasn't Padishah, he was only Caliph, he said, your ancestors allowed my ancestors in here 5 centuries ago, and so be my guest, you can travel without a ticket. And that story is true according to Karamet Bey. See, these are the things, when a magpie builds its nest, it picks up little things here and there. This is how I do history, just picking up odd facts here and there. But I've always enjoyed the company of old people, because when you know old people, you can add their memory to your memory. So when I first came here, one of my dearest friends was Evelina Scott, who graduated from the Girls' College in 1903. And so she gave me all the dedico-do going back to those times and so forth. I think maybe we can go to the next slide. Now here is Faradun Bey, here is Hussein Bay again. This is Hussein right here. And this is the class of 1926, which happens to be the year that I was born. But that's not the year I chose this, because in the upper, in the upper left-hand corner is someone named Homer Kalchas. Now, Homer Kalchas, you've surely not heard of. At the time this picture was taken, he was the Turkish champion in the 400-meter dash. He was from the Silivri. He used to tell me that he went home on weekends. If he got home late, the gates of Silivri would be closed. He'd have to sleep outside as if it were medieval times. But I first met him. Myself and Dolores and the 3 children, first went to Troy in the spring of 1961. And on the way home, we stopped off in Marmara Island. And Dolores and I were taking a snooze. And of course, the children escaped. And I looked, and they were down in the Maidan. They were talking to an older man. I went down, and he looked and got up and said, let me introduce myself, sir. My name is Homer, as if he were Homer, which he really was. It's Homer Kalchas. And he told me his story, graduated from Robert College, and he became a journalist. And in 1955, on the 40th anniversary of the landings to Gallipoli, he went to cover the Gallipoli campaign. And he met the only other journalist who was there at the time, whose name was Evelyn Lyle Kalchas. She was representing Australia and New Zealand. She came for the 40th anniversary, and they met and they fell in love. And Evelyn Lyle Kalchas, very, very great writer, whom we don't hear of this day. She was still writing up to the age of 96 in La Paix, wrote some wonderful books about Turkey. So I added their memory to mine. But Homer told me about one of his classmates, that class of 1926, they started in 1922. And the classmate he told me about was someone called Mehmet Orhan. Now, who's Mehmet Orhan? When I was doing the research in my history of Robert College, it wasn't just the stuff in New York that I got, but I found stuff elsewhere. In the registrar's office at Arnott Koinau, they don't even know it's there. There are a set of defters going from 1900 up to 1934, and each one of them lists every student by first name, last name, father's profession. And so I see Mehmet Orhan, father's name, I've forgotten that, but father's occupation, Prince. He was a grandson of Abdülhamit II. He became the head of the Ottoman line during the presidency of Turgut Özal, the head of the Ottoman line. And I happened to read an article about that in the Observer newspaper, and at the time I had just finished writing a book called Inside the Seraglio, which is a history of the Ottoman royal family. And I'm very proud of my word count, because I keep my word count to 100,000 words. And I'd finished the book that evening at 8 o'clock, and then we were invited out to dinner. And I found myself sitting next to a Beyzade Bülent, who began talking to me about his uncle, Mehmet Orhan, and Mehmet Orhan's adventures. Mehmet Orhan I think I'm probably going to run out of my time limit if I go on, but Mehmet Orhan actually registered at Robert College and did 1 year at Robert College. So we had a member of the royal family here. But I better move on, otherwise we'll never get it. This is one of the great men. This is Abner Tiergill, a graduate of Robert College, 1897. Just a poor Armenian boy, graduate scholarship student. He started Robert College in 1892, became librarian in 1897. 52 years without a break in the history of his Minnie Garwood's father. I never had the privilege of meeting him. He died shortly before I arrived here. But one of the glories of this university, Robert College, Boğaziçi University, is its library, and it's his creation. And this building was built specifically to be a library, and this is what it was still a library when I was here. But a library needs books, and books are a reflection usually of the reading needs and wants of the faculty, and the faculty who are very literate. But he chose most of the books. We have complete editions of the Loeb Classical Library, Greek and Latin. They're all his. And if you look through, you'll usually find the first person who's checked it out is Abner Tiergill. Like me and like many other people, is a complete autodidact. And he never missed a day in those 52 years. His wife was still very much alive when I came. So I'm supposed to be talking about continuity. Well, part of the continuity here is the legacy of people like Abner Tiergill. Unfortunately, his daughter Minnie was a dear friend of mine. Is due back here in about a couple of weeks. I wish she were here with me now to share that. But we've had on where we go. Now, this is when I first came here, there's this mistaken impression that until people like myself and others were hired, that this was just a sort of sleepy little college. Not at all. I would say that the heyday of this college came before we arrived. I would say the heyday of this college would have come probably in the 40s and 50s when Turkey was turning out, first of all, Turkish Theatre. The Turkish Theatre really starts here in 1908. The man who started the Turkish Theatre, an American academic, later went on and founded the theatre at Dartmouth College. And so in my time, the Turkish, or prior to my time, people like Charles McNeill, and at the Girls' College were people like Dorothea Is. And so great contribution to this college would have been its theatre. And these are two of the great actors from Genjura Kal. And so the one I know was, who is it? Tell me. Anyway, so when we first came here, all the people in Turkish film, Turkish theatre were graduates of the college. Let's move to the next slide. This is a great slide. This is one of the best. This, as a test for you, if you could identify any of the people in this picture. I showed this. Now this. That's Abdullah Quran. That's Abdullah Quran. This is Nur Yalman, the professor emeritus in anthropology at Harvard. Abdullah Quran is Hamlet, and Nur is Mercutio. It won't go on for Hillary. And this is Hillary Sumner Boyd. No. Now, so far as I'm concerned, the two, my memory only goes back as far as my own memory and memories I've added to it. From all the people that I've talked to whose memories go back into the 19th century, the two greatest teachers in the history of this place were Charles McNeill and Hillary Sumner Boyd. What's his name? What's his name? Yalman. Hillary trained a generation of actors. Hillary taught Greek, he taught Latin, he taught everything under the sun. Hillary was quite an extraordinary guy, a man of mystery. Hillary Sumner Boyd, none of those three names are actually his name. His real name is Carl Haywood. He was the illegitimate son of Wild Bill Haywood, the founder of the International Workers of the World. Now, a lot of the information that I have on him was dug up by Gulen, because See, Hillary is not very well known because he came here, he did a degree, an undergraduate degree at Columbia, then another degree at Oxford, and he graduated from Oxford probably he was born in 1915, 1936, and while at Oxford, he was the founder of the Oxford Trotsky Society, and Freddie Ayres, the great philosopher at Oxford, said that Hillary Sumner-Boyd, the founder, and so far as I know, the only member of the Oxford Trotsky Society. And the gentleness of his manners are belied by the ferocity of his political opinions. But he published the Trotsky newspaper, The Red Flag, out of his flat in Edgware Road in London. And then he somehow he got back to New York. And when I was going through the archives, I came across the notes of the interview that he had with the perfectly unsuspecting person who hired him. It said he looks a little bit delicate for the job. So Hillary came here in 1943 with Bob Avery, Hillary being an atheist and a Trotskyite, and Bob Avery being a member of the American board. And he never left. He just stayed here for the rest of life. And he is buried in the Protestant cemetery along with all of my colleagues. And I'm reserving a place there myself. Okay. But anyway, but I show this picture. At the end of when Abdullah Bey, last time I saw him was on his 70th birthday. He was already suffering from Alzheimer's. I showed him this photograph. Of course, he recognized everyone there. Okay, next slide. And now we can't. In 1957, 3 years before he came here, I was giving a paper at the American Physical Society in Washington, D.C. So I dropped in at the National Geographic headquarters and bought a copy of the National Geographic. So the next pictures you see will be from National Geographic magazine of 1957. You can go on now. So unfortunately, the pictures are a little unclear. But this is what the campus looked like in 1957. Next picture, and more. Unfortunately, this picture, this is our great headmaster, Duncan Valentine. This school was going along perfectly fine from 1863 up to 1956. And this gentleman, he wasn't a bad guy. He was friendly enough, but he was a big shot. And he came here with the idea of turning this place into a big American-style university. He had lots of contacts in Washington, got lots of money, and he decided, we'll expand this place. It won't be a sleepy college anymore. We're going to hire lots of physicists, chemists, mathematicians, and so forth, and got lots of buildings and laboratories and so forth. And but he had a wonderful idea along with that. He said, we want this to be a bicultural university. So he started, laid all the groundwork for something called the Bicultural Bilingual Humanities course, which is what made this place what it is then and what it is now. And the continuity in this place is precisely that program. And there's a mistaken idea that people like myself came and did it. No, people like myself came and were the beneficiaries of that. We learned from that. But there's several other things interesting. I want you to take a look at the campus as it was at that time. Okay, next slide, please. Unfortunately, do you see this, the most beautiful place in Istanbul, the most beautiful place in the whole world was the upper part of this campus, which used to be the college farm. There were sheep and cows grazing up there, and we used to, if you got home late after a party, you would just sleep out up there and listen to the nightingales. Next slide. This is Emre. This is this is Eileen Genensheim. This is the 1957, and there is this beautiful young lady who was whisked away by Emre Genensheim. I'm sorry, I didn't. So here she is, and now the next slide. I want you to read this. Just read that. You can read it better than I can. Okay, this is the man who wrote the article, Frank Shore, says, Oya Kinar, a pretty 18-year-old whose parents too studied at Robert College, excitedly told me that she had just been awarded a fellowship at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. I plan to study dramatics there, she said, and then I'll come back and find a place in the Turkish Theatre. Present attitude in Turkey doesn't encourage a girl to go into that kind of thing. And our alumni have to find it and bring them into that first. Oh yeah, take a bow. Now people want to know, why did I come here? I came here to meet Oya. I'll be damned. When I arrived here, this university had an annex, and that annex was called Nazmi's. I don't know if you remember Nazmi's. We actually arrived one evening, and the same evening we arrived here, we were sitting in Nazmi's. Well, I was only here a couple of months, and I'm sitting there, and this pretty, no longer 18, but only 21 or 2 comes along, and it's Oya. So, okay, we better move on. Now this, okay, this is, okay, great. This is the hero, because Duncan Ballantyne, the money, the influence, everything else, but the man who put it all into effect was this man. He's the one who hired me. The man was as straight as an arrow, but you wouldn't realize what a wicked sense of humor he had. He's the one responsible for, see, Duncan Ballantyne was, his presidency was abruptly halted in 1961 because he fell in love with his Turkish secretary. And the trustees said, you can have the job or the girl. He said, I'll take the girl, so he left, which was a wide choice. And so then they hired, so we, as a faculty, the Turkish faculty and the foreign faculty, American faculty, said, we would like Bob Hall to be our president. But needless to say, the trustees ignored it. They hadn't paid no attention to what we said. So they hired one loser after another one. And each time we'd say, please hire Bob. They said no, and so forth. So the last of the losers, John Scott Everton, demanded, he said, I will always accept the job if Hall goes. And so poor Hall had to leave. And the college was at that point helpless, because this man had been running the school as a dean, everything, and he didn't, all these American presidents with enormous salaries, but Bob Hall, he was just straight as an arrow. I would go in and have an argument with him, and he would, next day he'd just appear in my office and say, how are things going, John? Not a week would go by that man would not drop into my office, how are things going? And he himself, you know, from a working class family in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and BS, MS, PhD from Harvard, and he was a civil engineer by profession. He was teaching he was dean of engineering at Northwestern University in Chicago when the job was offered to him. So he gave up a tenured full professorship to come here, and he left with they didn't give him a golden handshake when he left. He had to go teach high school when he left here. So not a penny to them. Never complained at all. But anyway, he had a tremendous influence on my life. He hired me. So I was working at the time, I just got my PhD. I did all my graduate work at night at New York University, and I worked full-time in the daytime as a physicist, first in the U.S. Army Signal Corps, then controlled thermonuclear fusion program at Princeton. And I had just gotten my PhD, and they offered me a permanent job at Princeton. But when I first met my wife, Dolores, she was interested in me because of all the travel stories. I told her about all the travels around the world and so forth. So about a month after we met, we signed a pact in blood that we were going to spend our life traveling around the world by ourselves. We didn't realize we were going to have 3 children. So when in 1960 I got my PhD, offered a job at Princeton, she said, no, John, we could do better than that. And so I was admiring a flowering cherry tree on the campus at Princeton, and a friend of mine who had taught at Robert College 1947 to 50 said the Judas trees on the Bosphorus are much more beautiful. So I said, tell me more. He said, well, David Garwood is now at my house. He said, come and meet David Garwood. I met David Garwood. David Garwood told me about life here, and I said, okay, off we go. So I saw Dolores, and she said, off we go. And so now we can go to the next slide. And here we are. No. Now, the image of when Ghislaine showed you the image, she left out a very important person. See, here we are. There were two of these flights, one flight in 1959 and 1960. Bring out new faculty, bring out back old hands again. But in this particular picture, the man at the very top on the right is Philip Ralph. This is Philip Ralph. Philip Ralph was a very distinguished historian. His textbook on Western civilization, Burns and Ralph, is still required reading at Harvard, MIT, and so forth. Okay, this is Philip Ralph. He had just about finished his career in the US, decided he wanted to do something new, so Bob Hall found him, hired him, and he became the head of the humanities program in my time. A world-class Renaissance scholar, but like everyone here, he was a man of many talents. He was also a songwriter. Now, he had one song on the hit parade, and so here, in case you can't quite recognize him, this is Keith Greenwood. And hiding in the crowd is the Greenwood kids, including Tony Greenwood. And now, some of these people you may not have heard of. This is Donald Hoffman. Now, those of you, this is Donald Hoffman, musician, musicologist, composer, madman. This is Donald Hoffman with the first of his 9 wives. This is quite true. Here he is. I've been best man at 2 of his weddings. And this is, for those of you who didn't know him, this is Sheldon Wise, who was also an exceedingly important figure. He was the head of the English language preparatory division. Also, like almost all teachers here, an eccentric, a really original eccentric. And this is Doug Primo, another eccentric. This is David Garwood and Minnie Garwood and the Garwood children. Now, David was a prince of a man. He came out here in 1939, and he never left. He married Minnie. Minnie is the daughter of Abner Tiergill, the historian, and she is due back here any moment. Minnie is exactly my age. I have a great memory because I'm Irish. She has a great memory simply because she's never forgotten anything. And so I would like to have her here with me to verify what I'm saying. Because the trouble is, when you get as old as I am, by the way, despite my great age, I am outranked in seniority by almost everybody in this room. Because I disappeared for 17 years, but the people that were my students here, after they got their PhDs, they came back and they're still here. So every one of my students here has been here longer than I have. The only advantage in being old, see, people say there's certain advantages in being old, but I haven't discovered any yet. The only advantage is that people can't check on your stories. But Minnie can, and so I can get away with it until Minnie gets back again. So, but this is an extraordinary man here. That's Bill Hickman. No, Bill Hickman came out as just a young tutor, like many people did. He went on to become a tenured full professor at the University of California and responsible for a great edition of the life of Mehmet Fatih. Distinguished full professor in Berkeley. Now, I have a lot of my friends are distinguished historians, chemists, physicists, who chucked their job to do something else. He is currently driving a school bus. For one reason or another, insane reasons, my friends have all decided in mid-career to chuck what they're doing and do something more interesting. I could name after name after name. And in here, this is you can't quite see him, but this is Kay Rogers. And this is Buck Rogers. Now, Buck Rogers, you remember the old comic strip, Buck Rogers? Well, see, again, that's the advantage. Unless you're over 80 years old, you would know. Buck Rogers was the first spaceman. Well, this Buck Rogers was a poor farm boy in New Jersey who won a scholarship to Princeton, a boxing scholarship. Then got a PhD in chemistry and came out here for 3 years he started a chemistry program here. And great guy, great chemist, handsome, great athlete. And he stayed here 3 years, and he went back, and he's living in Professor Emeritus of Chemistry and the director of the On the Lamb Street Band in New York City. He lives in McDougal and Bleecker Street, and still as eccentric as ever. And people came here for odd reasons, and they may have stayed 3 years or 300 years, but they never forgot the experience here. And then we move on to my humble self here, and daughter Maureen, daughter Eileen, and I'm here by the scruff of his neck. I'm holding my son, Brendan, who these children had no say in coming here. But they arrived, and here they still. Next slide. Now this is this picture was taken probably when Brendan was about a year. This picture won an international prize. It just happened to be outstanding there, and that's my son Brendan, who chose not to be here today for one reason or another. Next slide. And this was taken in the spring of 1961 across the way in what used to be called the Sweet Waters of Asia. And that's on the Lou Hissar behind, that's the flowers. And the one in the middle is Brendan, the one on the right is left is Maureen, and it's Eileen there. And this is what this place looked like then. Now, the football stadium, there's a McDonald's and so forth. So has Istanbul changed? Yes, it has. Next slide. This is Suna Keeley. When I first knew her. And she was a colleague of mine in those years, and she a very, very good friend. I haven't seen her recently. Next slide. Fahir is. Now, Fahir was a colleague of mine here for many, many years, and he never spoke to me. He was a very distinguished man, very distinguished scholar. Didn't know who I was. Now, I had a fellowship at 1966-67. I had a fellowship at Oxford in the history of science, due to a letter of recommendation written for me by Dean Hall. And one day we chose to live in London instead, so I commuted out to Oxford once a week, and I was coming back from Oxford on the train. The train had a pub that was open longer hours than the rest of the pubs in Oxford. So I go to take the train, and I see someone reading a copy of Cumhuriyet newspaper. And I look over the top, and it's Fahir is, and I said, "Merhaba, Fahir." And he said, "Merhaba," and he puts up the newspaper again. That is a sum total of conversations I had in my lifetime with Fahir is. A lovely gentleman and a scholar. I don't know if the Fahir is dictionary has been changed a lot, but some of the translations in there are really funny because Kuzum is translated as "my dear chap." Anyway, next slide. And this is an historic picture here. This is me, of course, and this is Keith Greenwood. But you don't hear Keith's name much now, but Keith was but probably the star of our humanities program. Keith lectured on everything, on American. This is Keith Greenwood here. He lectured on politics, literature, American literature, anything going. And the lectures used to be in Albert Long Hall, and my office is directly below. And Keith's voice would come down the pipes, the vibrations. An extraordinary scholar. But this is Godfrey Goodwin. Now, those of you, things were different. Godfrey Goodwin is famous for his great history of Ottoman architecture and many other books on Turkey. Godfrey never spent a day of his life in a university. Godfrey joined the British Army on the 2nd of September, 1939, the day the war started. Hadn't even graduated from secondary school. Well, he had graduated from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. They turned him down because he only had one eye. And so he went out of the recruiting station and went outside and shook himself and walked back in again as if he were a different person. And they say, "Okay, come on." So they accepted him. They accepted him with only one eye. I mean, he had a glass eye, of course, the other one. And so he was in the British Army for 6 years with one eye. Now, one eye is a certain disadvantage when you're a soldier. You can close one eye when you aim a gun. but he was all through the North African campaign, the Italian campaign, but as a non-combatant. And the Allies had gotten us sort of north of Rome, and Godfrey was running a poetry magazine in Rome, and word came to him that some officer farther north in Italy had some poems he wanted to submit, so Godfrey got a driver, and they drove north, and they were mountain roads, and they rounded a bend, and they came to a field, and there were thousands of Germans in the field. And this is the story Godfrey himself told me. He said, and the Germans suddenly all got to their feet, and several generals came over to Godfrey and said, "May we surrender to you, sir?" They were surrendering the city of Milano to him. So Godfrey graciously accepted the surrender of Milano, and then went into Milano, and the Allies bombed Milano to pieces that night. And Godfrey woke up in the morning, and there was a shepherd. The hotel was in shambles, and there was a shepherd outside, and so on. Godfrey would tell me one of these stories a year. So anyway, Godfrey went back to England. He had hated England. First of all, he was only accidentally born in England. His father was a builder of railways, and he was actually in Portugal when his mother was, but the mother rushed back to have the baby in England, so he'd at least be born in England. But he spent his life abroad, and he had a family of painters. And so he went back to England only briefly to train as a teacher, and then he went to Alexandria and taught in Victoria College, where all the crown heads of the Islamic world send their sons. And so he taught there until Nasser threw all the foreigners out, and then he came here, taught at the English high school, and then, as God would have it, he came here and became professor of art and architecture. Never spent a day of his life in university, thank God, because it would have spoiled his quite extraordinary aesthetic sense. And Godfrey taught me Byzantine architecture, Ottoman architecture. He finished his career. He got married rather late, and just in time to have one child, went back to England, and became a teacher in a really bad news school in Notting Hill, and before the year was over, he was headmaster of the school. Everyone else had quit. And he wrote 2 novellas. But anyway, Ghislaine brought him back. Ghislaine used to run a superb summer school, and she brought Godfrey back in his latter years, and he began giving a course. But Godfrey's course was taking people around Istanbul. In fact, when I was here first, Godfrey would take all of us around Istanbul, and we'd start out with about 50 people. We'd end up with 4. It would be me and Dolores, and our children would be the only ones left, and so on. But he was still here up until a few years before. An absolutely extraordinary man, and one of the great teachers of my lifetime. And the person holding the binoculars is Bob McMickle. Now, you don't hear much about Bob. When I first came here, I was in the math department. I was acting head of the math department because there was no position in physics. And so who were my underlings? Jahid Arf and Fikret Kartel. Next slide. Oh, we got a little ahead of ourselves. We have to. This is college was famous. This is my wife Dolores, and that's Keith Greenwood. This is a production of Little Mary Sunshine, and that's Dolores. It was Little Mary Sunshine, and Keith played Chief Brown Bear. Next slide. The slides have gotten out of order, I see now. The next bunch of slides, this is Ishak Bars and Avedi Sejinlian. Next slide. This is Avedi Sejinlian. Next slide. This is Haluk Beker when his hair was still there. Next slide. And this is Orhan Alciolo. Next slide. And this is Buck Rogers. We really started chemistry here. Next slide. Next slide is Mehmet Rono. No. Next slide. This is Hans Welton, okay? He was the physics department. He was one of the people hired in 1959. He's an extraordinary man in every way, a madman, brilliant physicist, twisted mind, great physicist. He taught me how to teach at the expense of my sanity. but he, a very, very great teacher. The next slide. And this is, okay, now, this is yours truly, and this is Bob McMickle. We were the physics department. This is, Welton quit in midterm in 1962, and so we were the physics department, and then our students, and as they began to go away and come back again, then we had our students teaching with us. It's just the two of us in 1962. By the time I left in 76, we had a department of 13, and most of the department were our former students who remained behind after we left. Bob stayed after me for several years, but he just had a very, very serious heart operation last week, and I spoke to him a few days ago, and he's fine. He sends his love to all of you, and his apologies to all the people he gave D's to. See, when I go to weddings, and in fact, I went to a very, very posh wedding just last year at the Four Seasons Hotel. Seljuk Altun's daughter was marrying somebody else, and we went, Dolores and I went there, and the only seat left, there was a very old man sitting there, so I said, "Excuse me." He said, "Sir, you gave me a D 51 years ago." So, but the interesting thing is that the people I gave A's to were all poorly paid physicists and humanities teachers. The people I gave D's to were all quite wealthy men. So, but I left a notice at the door that none of them should be allowed in this evening either. Okay. Next slide. The slides are getting, now, the slides are really out of order. You won't recognize these people, but the guy in white is me. And the guy on the right is Hercule Milos. Now, Hercule Milos, at the time this photograph was taken, was the Turkish champion, 200 meters, 400 meters, okay? And there's someone behind us there, a young Austrian who showed up at the school for 1 year. And, you know, I used to be a fairly decent runner, but not world class. My career as a runner was always handicapped by the fact that I could never afford an athletic supporter, which is what the polite word for them, jockstrap. But anyway, the faculty participated in field day every year. And this particular year, I think, would be probably 1963. And each one of the schools, the School of Science and Language, Engineering School, Business School, would enter, and the faculty we would win. Buck Rogers that year won the javelin. Bedros, the Marangos, won the hammer throw. Neil Bull, head of the academy, won the pole vault. Me and my comrades, I also ran the 4x400. We placed second and so forth. And in this race, I'm racing against Turkish champion, and so I lost by about 50 meters. But but Hercule is one of these unusual people. He got a PhD in engineering, and then turned around and went back and got a PhD in Turkish studies at the University of Ankara. And he's the head of a group of people now, Turks and Greeks. For Turks, the Greek is the other. For Greeks, the Turk is the other. And he's doing some extremely interesting work. He gave a paper at the American Research Institute last week. So one of the things that this school has always done is people do things that they didn't expect to do, that people didn't expect them to do. Because you come in and find that you're, for example, our first physics major, Arif Derlik, retired as the head of the Department of Chinese Studies at Duke University. I cannot take any credit for that. Next slide. Now, this is each year the American faculty played against the students a game of American football. Now, these are great games. Nobody won and nobody lost. They were fought out in the mud, and there were scoreless ties. I'll show you. But there's some very unusual people here. This is Ed Jacobson. Now, Ed Jacobson was on the American. He taught mathematics in the academy. He was on the American Olympic team. He ran the 1,500 meters of the 1956 Olympics. And so in field day here, he ran the 800 meters in 2 minutes without even trying. And this is me, of course. And this is Cal Atwood, the assistant principal of a college. This is Buck Rogers. You can see how handsome he is. And this is John Sherishevsky, assistant headmaster and full-time hellraiser. This college, Robert Academy, there was a split between Robert Academy and Robert College. The most interesting people here in my time were actually at Robert Academy. Now, Sherishevsky was a great philanderer, but so was his wife. And at one dinner party, I can remember Sherishevsky sitting at a long table. He's at one end of the table, she's at the other end, and there are about 5 couples in between. And he said to his wife, he said, "You've slept with every man at Robert College." And she said, "Name 6. So the other thing I was going to say, but not in order, is the fact that people think to this day that this is a missionary school. But Cyrus Hammond himself, very early in his career, broke off with the missionaries. Why? Because he did not come here to convert people to He came here to teach enlightened young men and women. He wanted to have a girls' school as well, but he didn't get his way. But he had the good luck to meet Christopher Roberts, and he met Christopher Roberts while he was taking a boatload of bread across to feed my great-grandfather. And so it's Cyrus Hammond, the people tended to be quite religious at school, but beginning in the 30s and 40s, the time when Emre Cadenza was a student here, they certainly were not missionaries. They really had a very good time. And so, but the most interesting people were actually the people at the academy. The people at the Yüksek Okul were sort of technocrats. The really interesting people were the people who taught in the secondary school, with a few notable exceptions. Okay, next slide. The slides are really out of order now. And this is one of the great, now there should be applause. This is Alexander Nedelsky. This is one of the great men in the history of the school. He's the man standing upright, by the way. He taught my children. He was colonel of the Imperial Russian Cavalry. His mother was a Russian princess. He fought against the Red Army. He fought with General Wrangel's White Army. His great feat of heroism, dressed as a woman, he went to the biggest vodka factory in all of Russia and opened up all the stopcocks and let all the vodka in Russia drain away. He also, when he came here, he came here with General Wrangel's army. There were 100,000 white Russian refugees that came here after the Russian Revolution. He stayed on, and he did this job and that job. His first job at the college, he was head of the bowling academy, the bowling valley. And then he became director of athletics. He was also the coach of the Turkish fencing team. One of his students was Halet Chambel. I don't know if you know Halet Chambel. Halet Chambel won a bronze medal at the 1936 Olympics. There were 2 college athletes at the 1936 Olympics, Halet Chambel in fencing and Abbas Bey in wrestling. But Halet is still doing archaeology. Her very dear colleague, Bahadir Alkam, that's another name you don't hear now. Bahadir Alkam was Halet Chambel's colleague in their game-changing excavations in the Amok Basin region. This changed our whole perception of prehistory. Bahadir Alkam taught with me, he was a very close friend of mine. He once said he spoke 7 languages, but 5 of them had not been spoken in 5,000 years. We used to meet in the middle of the football. His daughter was in prison at the, that's another story altogether, but next slide, we better get on. And this is, now, when I came back here in 1993, I went up to the campus, and I was shocked. There was grass growing there. First person I met was, what's his name, our former director, Hussein Bay. And he said, what do you think of it, John? I said, you have covered up the mark right there. Alexander Nedelsky had driven an iron stake to mark the point at which Michael Dorizas had set the world record for the javelin throw in 1906. But anyway, and with the next slide. This is finally what I wanted to get to. Now, this is Jahidorf. One of the other earth-shaking things that in 1958 or 57, the first two girls were accidentally admitted to it. They say accidentally, but it was a plot. But Jahidorf, he was my first day in the job. Here I am. By the way, my teaching load then, I taught four sections of calculus. 1, 2, 3, 4. First, I began to lose my mind along the fourth class, but my first day on the job, first person I meet is Jahid. He had a unique way of sorting out his mail. He would come in once a week and he'd go through, and if it was an air mail, he'd keep it. Anything that was not air mail was straight in the wastebasket. No. But he, but what he did, but the first two girls, now, Fatma, were you admitted in 57? Yeah. So 57, Inci Üsküdarlı and Fatma Arf were admitted quite by accident, they say. But it was the nose of the camel in the tent. But one of the things, see, when we were first hired, there was a party given for us in Princeton at on Lake Carnegie. And some of the old teachers who were going back again told us what's happening in Istanbul. There was a coup in Istanbul in the spring of 1960, May of 1960. And one person said, well, Jahidorf, the students walked down from the campus to Bebek, did you not? Yeah. In other words, yeah, in 1960, in May, the students of Robert College walked down from the campus to Bebek, but Jahidorf walked down with his daughter, holding her hand the entire way. Now, I was told that in Princeton, and then I come and I meet Jahidorf, and he's just wondering, who's this callow American here? Then the other person I met the same day is Fikret Kortel, another great mathematician. And then later the same day I met Bahadur Al-Kam, and I said, this is really great. I mean, if I had a question in ancient history, I would talk to Bob Hardy, who was one of the pioneers. And I should also say about Halat Shambel, she was one of the group that cracked the Hittite language at Boğaziçi in 1936. If I had a question about the Renaissance, I'd go see Philip Ralph. So here I'm pretending to be a teacher, but I'm actually a student. Okay, next slide. This is Özer Kabaş. Özer Kabaş. Now, Özer Kabaş, he was, I don't know what his official position, he was a graduate of the college. He was a painter. He taught history of art, history of architecture. He was a world-class painter, world-class sculptor. He was instrumental in getting his, when I first came here, I was probably more interested in the city than I was in the college, because we were into town every weekend, rain or dry, hot or cold. My poor wife and children would drag them into town, drag them around town, and I got to know the town exceedingly well. But he was instrumental in getting here Tahir Alangu, the great expert in Turkish folklore. Now, I couldn't speak a word of Turkish, and my Tarzanja is still very primitive. Tahir Alangu couldn't speak a word of English, but we had a common knowledge of Istanbul. And Tahir Alangu taught me about the folklore of Istanbul. Personally took me to meyhanes in Samatya, introduced me to old meyhanes where the Külhan Beyler, poetry of the Külhan Beyler, who remembers that? But Özer was responsible, but also he was my introduction to the art world of Istanbul. They introduced me to Ali Berger, the great painter, and so and he had a studio out on Marmara Island, and his studio was on the ancient sculptures on Marmara Island. He discovered back-to-back statues of Plato and Aristotle, which were in his studio. A wonderful man, wonderful person, but again, one of my teachers here. Next slide. Here's Javad Japan. Now this is something. When I first came, Dolores and I first came here, we found there was an acute shortage of Irish people. There were no Irish people here at all. But we So, see, when I first met Dolores, she's second-generation Irish. I'm not only first-generation Irish, but they talk about Irish Americans, but I'm Irish American, so I'm a double immigrant. But we were determined to have our St. Patrick's party. Now, Javad Japan graduated from here and then did his PhD at Cambridge University in Irish literature. And he was a close personal friend of Sean O'Casey, the great Irish poet. He was a house guest of Sean O'Casey for months. Sean O'Casey gave him one of those little skull caps that he wore. And in 1955, he founded the Irish-Turkish Poetry Society, which still meets twice a year. It meets in Ireland and it meets here. I'll say more about that in a second, because okay, since I started speaking about that, Irish poetry, Turkish poets and Irish poets are very, very different. Turkish poets tend to chant, The Irish poets, when they're up there, they're drinking out of a bottle of whiskey, they're playing the fiddle, and they're dancing at the same time. And so the Turks have had to call on reinforcements now, so they have to bring in Arabs and Lebanese and people like that. But Ireland has 4 Nobel Prizes in literature for a population of only 6 million. Turkey also has 4 Nobel Prizes, but they don't know it, because when Orhan Pamuk won his Nobel Prize, he was the 4th Turkish citizen to win a Nobel Prize in literature. George Seferis, a Greek from Izmir, Ilyas Kaneti, a Jew from Salimbria, Odysseus Elitis, a Greek from Limnos, all Turks, Turkish citizens. America has lots of Nobel Prizes, but the people who are born in other countries. But anyway, the greatest poet in Ireland now is a poet named Nuala MacDonagh, who writes only in English, or only in Irish. Other poets translate her work into English, and her Turkish husband translates her poetry into Turkish. So all her books for the last 20 years are in 3 languages. But he also is a member of another group. I was very early on introduced to Çiçek Passage. In Çiçek Passage, first time I wandered in there, I see a group of men at a table about this long, just about this long, and Javad is sitting at this end, and then another man at that end, and in between, about 5 men, 5 women, and I was introduced to all of them. There were 2 women sitting there, and they were both owners of bordellos. The men were journalists, writers, athletes, or just types, but the women at that particular time, it didn't continue. It happened to be intellectuals who just happened to own bordellos at the time. I don't know if you remember Mildred Manoukian, but Mildred Manoukian for many years was Turkey's #1 taxpayer, head of the coach company. But anyway, this particular group now, I became ex officio. I never presumed to sit at the table. I always sit at the next table. But you can count on Friday at the time of the noon is on, the noon prayer, they have their first raka. And there they are. I was two or 3 weeks ago, I happened to be there on Friday, and there they all were. And the person I know best was Aydin Boysan, 92 years old. He has not missed a meeting in 55 years. So this is one of the great intellectual traditions of Istanbul, and he's perpetuated that. And he's also had a brief career as a movie actor. He played a part in Eşkıya, the great movie. This is not what he was trained for, but that's what he's also a distinguished man of letter, a distinguished poet, distinguished translator of poetry, and so forth. He's Turkey's intellectual ambassador to the world of poetry. Next slide. I have no idea what's coming up. Oh, this slide. It's a pity you can't see this better. This is, because we have, this is the Bektashi Teke. This is, I'll show you what the characters are. This is, here we are. This is Nusret Baba. The Teke on top of the hill. The Teke on top of the hill was built in 1452 by the Bektashi dervishes who were with Fatih's army. The oldest grave up there is 1452. That mezarlik has spread down the hill all the way down to the Bosphorus. And this is the last Shay of the is Nusret Baba. He is the son of Nafi Baba, famous Nafi Baba. See, when Ataturk closed all the dervish brotherhoods, he went off to the States, and he took as his official name Baba, and he married an American wife, and his sons are named John Baba, and Robert Baba, and Arthur Baba. and he came back for this reunion, especially for this reunion, and Suhaila Artamel, here's Suhaila. Suhaila, by the way, Suhaila, please say that. Now, among the other things that Duncan Ballantyne did, he established the Rockefeller Foundation Fellowships, and the first recipient of the Rockefeller Foundation was Suhaila Artamel. And she took along with her fiancé, Ali Artamel. Now, those of you who didn't remember, I don't know if any people who remember Ali Artamel, we shared a house with them for 9 years. We were upstairs, they were downstairs. Ali Artamel was born in 1924, but he was conceived in 1923. And he said, I entered my mummy's womb in the darkness of the Ottoman Empire, and I emerged in the full light of the Turkish Republic. And this is Philip Ralph, and this is my humble self, and this is Gül Hanım, one of the women dervishes, and this is Dolores, and this is Brendan, and I don't know, I don't see Mehmet Artamel there at all, but anyway, oh, there. Now, his name used to be Mehmet Artamel, it's now M. Nafi Artamel, which he's very proud of. And the mosque, you know, when we have physics departments meeting, it's very interesting because the mosque is right next to the physics department. And when the azan is given, we have to stop the meeting because I'm saying that mosque is the Nafi Baba Jami, right? And so, but you may not know this, but one of the books I want to write, and I'm actually started writing right now, is called Our Village, Our University. Because Rumi Hisar, which is first mentioned actually in Herodotus, and Herodotus first mentions this city, he talks about the bridge of boats built by Darius in 512 BC. That bridge of boats was built exactly where the present bridge is. The present bridge would be right over this campus were it not for Suhaila Artamel and others who pushed it that way a little bit. So otherwise, we'd hear the traffic going right overhead right here now. But anyway, that village was in existence when Darius built that bridge. He was a campaign against the Scythians, and but he talks about the village here, and that village. When Fatih built his castle, the village was here. In fact, when you're going out of this building, pay particular attention on the right. You'll see a big marble capital, the things they put on top of columns. That is from the monastery of St. Michael. When Fatih was building Rumi Hisar, he destroyed the monastery of St. Michael, which is mentioned in Procopius's edifices. Procopius was Justinian's court historian and has a list of all the buildings that Procopius built and that Justinian built, and he mentions the monastery of St. Michael. That is the capital which Gülen found in the Bin's house, where it was being used as a wellhead and had a carted here and so forth. So we are sitting on a very, very ancient site right here now. So not all the antiquities are the people listening here, but there are actually... So, okay, next slide, if there's something left. And this is Nafi Baba Turbe, which Edem Eldem is restoring and be a cultural center soon. Do you know that if you go up to Hisar Usu, which is now the upper part, half of the population of that are Alavi, and many of them are descendants of the Dervish community. There's an extraordinary taxi driver named Şevket Dervish is his name. He's now, Şevket is probably now in his late 40s, but he's born in Rumi Hisar, he's an Alavi. He's been a taxi driver since the age of 17. He's been taking photographs of Istanbul at night. He had an exhibition at the Saraya Passage about 3 years ago, an exhibition in Thessaloniki, exhibition in Paris. He's had an exhibition in New York, in London. He's one of the world's famous photographers. He's still a taxi driver here. And you may actually have a taxi cab. I first recognized who he was because he was playing a record once. He was playing, I should tell you that another extraordinary person I met. One evening, I was told that Ashik Veysel is playing at Albert Long Hall. And it was Eric Kabash who had run. Ashik Veysel was playing, and there were one or two faculty members, a few students, but all of the people from the Gezi Kandu came crowding down to hear him play. And he sang Kara Toprak. And so, anyway, next slide. And so this, now this is, when I said that, first photograph, this is Michael Austin. He was the star of our humanities program. He was a graduate of Oxford. And with him is the second of Donald Hoffman's 9 wives, or the third, I'm not quite sure which, Mary Berkman, who had a collection of very interesting husbands, and she's still here. She's a very dear friend of ours. But this is Michael. Now, Michael is one of my heroes. He's Tony Greenwood's hero. He's a very handsome man, great scholar, great adventurer. Michael, I'll just tell you one Michael Austin story. People used to ask Michael where he learned his English. I mean, his Turkish was so good. But Michael, he was, we used to call the bilingual, bicultural, bisexual humanities course. But Michael was a very handsome man. He loved men and he loved women, but he always wanted to be a priest. And so we left here in '76, and we went to Athens for 3 years, and Michael left at the same time. He was Hilary's and the boys' companion, not lover at all. And Hilary died just before again. Michael came down, but he got married. He married a teacher at the community school. It was one of the happiest marriages I have ever seen in my whole life. But Michael desperately wanted to be a priest, and he eventually was ordained as an Anglican priest, and he had a parish in the Cotswolds. My daughter Maureen had lost contact with him, but she had gone to the Cotswolds on a trip and seen Michael running a beautiful 13th century Norman church, and she discovered him. So she said, "John, you must come. Michael is the pastor of a church in the Cotswolds." I went on a holiday, and I came, and there was this beautiful, it's Christmas Eve, and there we are, organ playing, and Michael's giving the sermon. He's a terribly handsome man, and people are admiring him, and he comes down the main aisle, and I'm sitting on the aisle, and he's coming past, and he had no idea I was there. And I put out my hand, and he looked at me, and he said, "Esholashek." This is the true story. It's Michael Austin. These are the kind of people we had here, and we still have, there are very respectable people here pretending to be, but there are still very unusual people here. Okay, next slide. Now this is, now some of our students are now, this picture was taken, it probably says so on it, but and the cast of characters, this is my humble self, this is Elisa Odebasha. This is a very important character, she's a Greek secretary. And here is this person's not, this is Erdal Inidu. Now, Erdal and I overlapped at Princeton. We never met each other there. And this is Bob McMickle, who's the unsung hero, because Bob did all the work of creating this physics to Bob. And I sort of was the playboy, but Bob did all the work and doesn't get credit for it. And this is a visiting German professor. And this person I don't know, but here's Haluk, and here's Piquet Cortel, and here's Alpar. Most people don't know it, but Alpar was a champion swimmer in this time. But anyway, this would be in the late, early 70s, I think. But next slide after, and we'll see the end. Now this is, I have now disappeared, so I've gone. And so these are my descendants, all of you. See, now, if you look here, here, my old lecture room was here. This room in here used to be the modern physics lab, which Bob McMickle started. But in 7 years ago, around the time of my 80th birthday, Aisha Soysal was gracious enough to dedicate that room in there as a John Freely seminar room, okay? I haven't been there myself. So about 3 or 4 years ago, a friend of my daughter's from Harvard, Alkis Doxiadis, Maureen and he were freshmen together, but then they lost contact. Then he reestablished contact, and he asked about me, and she said, my father's still teaching there. So when he came to give a seminar here about 4 years ago, and a young graduate assistant met him at the airport, and he said, I hope to meet John Freely when I'm here. And she said to him, John Freely is not a person, it's a room. Okay. Now, next slide. Now, when I come back here again, I picked up, Godfrey Goodwin had started a tradition. In fact, you go back even farther. It used to be a tradition at this college. Evelina Scott, who graduated from the Girls' College in Iskadar in 1906, actually, used one day a year, she would take people on a tour of Scutari, as they called it then. And then later on, Hillary started the custom of taking people around town, and Godfrey started the custom, and then I took people around town. Because actually, when it comes to architectural, historical studies of Istanbul, the first one here was our first historian, who is our first historian at the college, started a tradition of Alexander von Milligan. Alexander von Milligan's father was a personal physician. He was Byron's physician at Messalongi, misdiagnosed Byron's malaria. But he was then hired by Abdul Hamid. He was a personal physician for every sultan, for Abdul Hamid, Mahmud II to Abdul Hamid II. But his son became the first professor of history here and the first person to write about the antiquities of the city. And then the tradition of studies of the architecture of Istanbul passed on from one to another. It passed on to Hillary, and then to Godfrey, and then to me, and then to Danishmand, and so forth. I think it's maybe withering now, but I hope that somebody will pick it up. So when I came back here again, Ghislaine once again asked me one summer, Godfrey was giving these courses, taking people around Istanbul, and he couldn't come one summer, so he asked me to do it for him, so I did. And then I began teaching it during the year. This is me with my class. We would meet people. I had usually around 70, 75 people. And we would meet outside of Hagia Sophia, across from Hagia Sophia. And there was an old man, about my age, who sold fezzes. He took attendance. And then people would then quickly sneak away, many of them. But one day, I was meeting my class there, and this is me. Where is he? This is Çelik Ersoy. Çelik Ersoy, me, and this is the Çelik Ersoy Foundation. This is Soğuk Çeşme Sokak. And this is, if you've not been there, he is the one responsible. This street, which is backs against the wall of Topkapı Sarayı, was on the verge of broken down houses. He restored that. He restored many other buildings and palaces in Istanbul. He's mostly forgotten now. Great gentleman. He saw me meeting my class one morning in front of Hagia Sophia. He said, "What is this, Professor Freely?" I said, "This is my class." He said, "Would you mind if I took over your class today?" So he took the class, and he gave us a tour of his museum. One of the great experiences of my life. Again, one of my teachers. It was a very successful class because 2 marriages resulted from that class. But there's a special barber that I go to. The barber is Ghazi's. I don't know if you know it, but it's just opposite the library. And I was telling you, well, you remember that class too, weren't you? Anyway, I was getting a haircut, which I do with my damat every couple of months. And somebody's getting a haircut, and he said, "Sir, I was a student in your class in Strolling to Istanbul." And I said, "Yes, very successful class, 2 marriages." He said, "Make that 3, sir." So he also. So next slide. Now here, I don't know if you can see this. This is someone I used to know. Yeah, okay. This is someone I used to know. It's me. Okay, next slide. Okay, I just got the signal that I have to start. And this is me again. This guy I don't know at all. It's me at a later time. Next slide. And this is this is again someone. This is me again. Enough of me, but some of my students. Next slide. And this, we come to the end of the line. This is continuity. This is Hachik the barber. Hachik the barber began cutting hair in the presidency of Caleb Gates in 1930. He was cutting hair when I first came. I had one haircut there, which convinced me I'd never get another haircut there. But he had a young assistant named Jalal, and Jalal gave Haluk Bekir a terrible haircut a few days ago. So this is not the end of the story. We have one more slide. And this is the next generation right here. Now, I did an article for the Alumni magazine a few weeks ago, and I call this is the young Galileo, and he's with the clock. This is the clock at Hamlin Hall, which never told correct time, never, until Galileo picked it up. So here is the next generation. Oh, there's one more slide. And this is. Now, I had the great good fortune to have. There's something we've all heard about human genealogy. You know, we all date back to Adam and Eve. Adam apparently never met Eve, but intellectually, there's something called the Math Science Genealogy website. And I went on that. I met a Romanian mathematician some years ago, and he said, "Where did you study mathematics?" I said, "I studied at New York University." So on this website, you can look up who your teacher was. So what I have done, this is an abbreviated version of my undergraduate and graduate teachers, and you can trace yourself. The interesting thing about this is you can, by the way, it's a continuous thing. You can trace yourself all the way through, and if you have any students, you can put. You don't have to be famous. I'm certainly not famous, but you can go all the way back. The interesting thing is, when I was a physicist, there weren't too many physicists. There are a lot more now. But as you go back in time, there are fewer and fewer. And the line gets very thin, and it gets tenuous, because Newton, for example, had only one student, a complete nonentity, but he serves a purpose because he keeps the chain going. Copernicus, I have a biography of Copernicus coming out early next year. Copernicus had no students, but shortly before he died, a young German mathematician heard about this crazy Polish monk that had this theory that the sun was at the center. He went and worked with him, and so we can count him. Otherwise, continuity would be broken there. And through Copernicus' teacher it was Isaac Barrow, who was actually his mentor at Cambridge. When Newton went to Cambridge, he started late. He started at 19. And his mentor, Isaac Barrow, realized this kid is smarter than I am. So when Newton finished his fourth year, Barrow said, "I resign. You take over the professorship." That's it. And Isaac Barrow then went on to be a biblical scholar. Actually came down here and was the one who discovered the Archimedes Codex and so forth. But the line gets very thin, and it goes back to the first Greeks studying at Italian universities, and then it goes back to the University of Constantinople in 1375, back right here. And then if you, at the other end, you can go from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle to Straton, and then you can go to Archimedes, and you can go, and then there are a few gaps. You can be sure that there's someone there, we just don't know the name. And so one of my projects, when I get old, one of my projects is going to be to connect up these two chains, connect up this chain and that chain. But now, I'll say if you break the chain, then you've got to start all over again. We don't want to do that, do we? So that's it. I finished. Thanks very much.